Quick question. Do you remember how much a movie ticket cost the last time you actually checked the price? Or how much you used to spend on groceries before you stopped checking the receipt because it was too depressing? Here's the strange part. Your paycheck probably went up since then too, maybe by a decent amount. So why does it feel like you're falling behind instead of getting ahead? That feeling has a name. It's called inflation, and almost nobody can explain it in one sentence without either putting you to sleep or making it sound like some evil conspiracy. It's neither. It's actually one of the most human things an economy does. And once you see how it really works, you'll never look at a receipt, a paycheck, or a headline about the Federal Reserve the same way again. Let's get one thing straight before we go further. Inflation is not a single event. It's not a switch someone flips. It's a result, a symptom. Prices don't rise on their own out of nowhere. They rise because something changed underneath them. And that something is almost always a mismatch. A mismatch between how much people want and how much is actually available. Or a mismatch between how much money exists and how many things that money can buy. Once you understand that inflation is really just an imbalance showing up as a price tag, the whole topic stops being scary math and starts being common sense. And the wild part is, there isn't just one kind of imbalance. There are several completely different roads that all lead to the same destination: higher prices. Most people lump them all together and call it inflation, but treating them as one thing is like treating a fever, a sunburn, and a broken bone as the same injury just because they all hurt. So let's actually separate them, because once you can tell them apart, you can understand almost any news headline about the economy without needing a finance degree. Picture a small city. Nothing fictional or exotic. Just an ordinary town with ordinary stores, ordinary jobs, and ordinary people trying to live their lives. Everything this town buys and sells runs on the same basic forces that run the entire American economy. 4 different things can happen in this town, and each one raises prices for a completely different reason. First scenario. A huge number of people suddenly want the same thing at the same time, but the supply hasn't caught up yet. Think about what happened with home gyms and workout equipment in 2020. Everybody wanted a treadmill or a set of dumbbells at once. The companies making them hadn't planned for that surge. Suddenly, there were 10 buyers lined up for every treadmill on the shelf. When that happens, sellers don't need a meeting to decide what to do. The price just climbs on its own, because whoever's willing to pay the most gets it first. This is called demand pull inflation. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. Second scenario. Now flip it around. Demand stays exactly the same. Nobody wants more than usual, but it suddenly costs more to make the product in the first place. Maybe the price of steel jumps. Maybe fuel costs spike. Maybe a key ingredient becomes harder to source. The business still has bills to pay and workers to keep employed, so that extra cost has to go somewhere, and it goes straight into the price tag. This is cost push inflation, and you've absolutely lived through it. Remember when a used car, of all things, suddenly cost more than it did brand new a couple years earlier? That wasn't because everyone became obsessed with used cars overnight. It was because a global shortage of computer chips made it harder to build new cars, so buyers rushed toward the used ones instead, and prices on both sides spiked. Third scenario, and this one is sneakier. Demand hasn't changed. Costs haven't really changed either, but the actual supply of the product shrinks. A drought wipes out part of a wheat harvest. A hurricane shuts down oil refineries along the Gulf Coast. Suddenly, there's simply less of something to go around, even though nobody wanted more of it and nobody's making it more expensively. Less stuff, same number of buyers, prices rise. Simple scarcity. Fourth scenario, and this is the one that can affect prices across the economy, not just one product. This can happen when money and demand grow faster than the economy's ability to produce goods and services. Picture it like this. Imagine every dollar in circulation is one vote for how goods and services get divided up among everyone. If the number of votes suddenly doubles, but the number of things being voted on stays the same, each individual vote is now worth less. Economists often connect this kind of inflation to monetary and fiscal stimulus, when spending power grows faster than the economy's ability to keep up. The Federal Reserve has a major role in monetary policy, while the government influences demand through fiscal policy. Let's make monetary inflation less abstract. because this is the one people misunderstand the most. Think back to 2020 and 2021. Millions of Americans received stimulus checks. That money didn't appear because the economy suddenly produced more cars, more homes, more chicken wings, more concert tickets. At the same time, the economy was dealing with major supply disruptions, while demand for many goods came roaring back. People also had more money to spend because of fiscal support. So you had more spending power running into an economy that couldn't fully keep up with demand. Prices at restaurants, at grocery stores, and at the pump all moved higher, and both demand and supply problems played a role. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and where things can spiral if nobody hits the brakes. Say prices start climbing because spending power is growing faster than the economy's ability to produce goods. People start to feel squeezed, so there's pressure on the government to help, maybe by providing even more support to help people afford the higher prices. But if that support keeps adding to demand while the supply of goods remains limited, prices can climb again. That can create a dangerous feedback loop. If a country loses control of that process, especially while facing severe fiscal problems and falling production, it can eventually lead to hyperinflation, with prices doubling in weeks or even days. This isn't a hypothetical. It happened in Germany in the 1920s, when people famously needed wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy bread. It happened more recently in Zimbabwe, where the government eventually had to print a $100 trillion bill that couldn't buy a bus ticket. It happened in Venezuela in the 2010s, so severely that many people simply stopped trusting their own currency altogether and started using US dollars or even bartering instead. In every one of these cases, the pattern was identical. Print faster than the economy grows, and eventually the money in your wallet becomes closer to wallpaper than currency. Here's the part almost nobody tells you, and it's honestly the single most important idea in this entire video. Inflation itself is not automatically the villain. What actually determines whether inflation hurts you or barely touches you is the relationship between two numbers: how fast prices are rising and how fast your income is rising. If your paycheck grows at roughly the same pace as prices, you're basically standing still, mildly annoyed, but not actually losing ground. If your paycheck somehow grows faster than prices, you're quietly getting richer even while headlines are screaming about inflation, because your buying power is expanding. But if prices rise and your paycheck doesn't move, that's when inflation stops being an economic statistic and starts being a real felt loss. That's the version that keeps people up at night wondering where their money went. This is exactly why two people can live in the same country, read the same news, and have completely opposite experiences of inflation. One person got a raise that outpaced rising costs and feels fine. Another person's wage stayed flat while their rent, their gas, and their groceries all crept upward. And for them, it feels like the ground is disappearing under their feet. Same economy, two totally different realities. So what do you actually do with this information, besides sounding smart at dinner? The single biggest defense against inflation isn't clipping coupons or cutting out your morning coffee. It's making sure your money isn't just sitting there losing value while everything around it gets more expensive. Cash sitting in a low-interest account is, in a very real sense, quietly shrinking every year because it buys less and less of the same stuff. That's the entire reason people invest in things that historically tend to grow faster than prices rise. A share of a company, a piece of real estate, an index fund tracking the broader stock market. These aren't magic tricks. They're simply assets that, over long stretches of time, have tended to outpace the rate prices climb, which means your money is doing the opposite of what cash under a mattress does. It's growing to meet inflation instead of getting quietly eaten by it. You don't need to become a stock market expert overnight. You just need to understand the basic principle. Money that isn't working for you is slowly and invisibly working against you. So the next time you see a price that makes you do a double take, You'll know it's not random and it's not personal. It's one of four things happening or some mix of them. Too many buyers chasing too little stuff. Rising costs getting passed down the chain. A supply that shrank for reasons that have nothing to do with demand. Or simply more dollars circulating than the economy actually has goods to match. Inflation isn't some far-off concept that only economists in suits argue about on television. It's playing out in your grocery cart, your gas tank, and your rent payment every single month. Understanding it doesn't make the prices go away, but it does mean you finally understand the game you're playing. And that changes everything, because a game you understand is a game you can actually plan for. If this finally made inflation click for you, that's exactly what this channel is here for. Breaking down the economy in plain English so it stops being confusing and starts being useful. Subscribe if you want more of this, because there's a lot more to unpack.